Right. Okay. Let's crack on from here. I'm sure we'll have a few more come in as we start, but I'm sure they won't miss too much at the beginning because we'll just whip through some intros. So first of all, a big thank you to all of you who have joined us today on a lovely mouthful of a title for a webinar, Demystifying Cloud for Healthcare, Improving Patient Outcomes Through Secure Collaboration. I'll start by doing some quick introductions so you know who we all are. Firstly, myself, my name's Justin Day. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Gateway, and I'm absolutely delighted to have the guys that we've got along today to be with us. So I'll quickly hand over to them in no particular order to give a quick introduction to themselves. So I think I'll start with the best. So Abby, you can go first.
Thank you very much. I'm Abby Jackson. I am the former head of healthcare at Softcat, and I now work very closely with our healthcare chief technologist to work out a strategy about how we work with NHS organisations.
Excellent. Thanks, Abby. And Tom?
Thanks, Justin. So my name is Tom Allen. I work for Amazon Web Services in the UK healthcare team, with particular responsibility for leading our engagements with NHS organisations, both in the central NHS organisations, but also regional trusts or ICSs as they'll become, and in the devolved nations as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. And finally, Chris.
Thanks, Justin. So, hi, everyone. So my name is Chris Suter. I'm a lead infrastructure and connectivity architect at once was NHSX, now NHS England's Transformation Directorate, and mostly focus on cloud adoption throughout the NHS.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. So I am delighted to say that my challenge for today is to try to do the least talking, which is actually a pretty big challenge for me. And I'm going to fail immediately by starting by giving you a couple of minutes spiel before we get into the nuts and bolts of things. So firstly, just wanted to look at exactly what the webinar is and what we're looking to achieve here. We're looking to ultimately focus on three main outcomes, not necessarily in three specific blocks, just kind of a theme throughout. We're looking at demystifying cloud and probably give a little bit of explanation around that. I think cloud is as much an ethereal thing as it is a philosophical thing. It means different things to different people. To some people, it means hosting. To some people, it means an approach. It's about understanding exactly what that is, what context that is, understanding how we can best use it in the context of course, today, health, collaboration. I know it's an oft-used word, but this today is a great example of how we work together. We've got 4 people here, although like I say, I don't want to do too much talking today, who are from different organisations who work together all the time, work together ultimately to deliver the best outcomes in this health environment, which leads us to the final one, which is improving patient outcomes. Because ultimately, when we're talking about health, the customer and the end customer in this area, of course, is the patient. And when we talk about technology, a lot of us, particularly if we're technologists, get very excited about technology, but it's about what we're driving to the end. It's the most important thing. It's about that patient outcome. What can we achieve at the bedside, at the ward, there are many examples of where that can go to. And ultimately, that's what we're looking to drive throughout. So, a quick sort of intro into this, I suppose, is looking about some commonalities that we might see across the public sector. So not looking too far afield and outside of health, but looking outside of health within the greater public sector, is that there are a lot of common challenges. And there's been a lot of common challenges over the last few years, particularly as cloud has become as large and as much of an expectation as it deserves to be. And when I talk about public sector challenges, I'm thinking about central government, and when I'm thinking about health, I'm thinking about bigger, more difficult and complex areas to deal with. And the sorts of challenges that we're seeing that come as no real surprise would be the fact that you have the desire and the need to move very quickly on the ground. Things are changing and expectations are changing, and they're very quick. but trying to work with legacy technologies, legacy approaches. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Legacy is often seen as a bad word. It's not a bad word. It's just, this is what we have. This is what we have to deal with. We have to move, and we have to make sure that we do it in the most appropriate way, whilst understanding that we're getting the best out of everything we can as we move, not making mistakes, and all of those things. When we then come into health, we can add a couple of little nuances as well. Of course, you're going to have things that are specific to health, not just technically, of course, in the field of health, but from technical nuances, you might be looking at networks like the HSCN. You might be looking at how you can use certain parts of cloud, internet first policies, and things that have been changing as we go, not to mention everyone's favorite COVID-19, and seeing how that has positively affected change, whilst of course negatively being a global pandemic, which goes without saying. It's obviously great for us to be able to say that we work together, talking about that collaboration, the likes of Cloud Gateway, work with Softcat all the time, work with AWS all the time, and that is what is yielding the best results. But it's actually not those two guys I'm going to go to first. It's actually Chris I'm going to go to first. I think in the last couple of years, the biggest challenge Chris has faced is trying to remember which organization he works for, because it changes so often. But Chris, tell us a little bit about from NHS England's perspective, what is the landscape? What is the expectation? What is changing there?
Really good question, Justin. And to be quite honest, it all boils down to where we were before. So just give a bit of context, a bit of history behind this. So we all know back in, it was 2013, 2014, there was the public cloud first initiative by the government, where we tried to basically get all the government services to start looking at using public cloud services for a lot more cost efficiencies there, and also start interacting a bit more. Again, that stumbled quite a bit, hands up. We all know that, nothing much there. And then back in 2018, from a healthcare perspective, then Secretary of State, then we tried to accelerate that going forward. Again, it was slow pace, and then it came in, we had the pandemic, like you mentioned before. This for us really set that bar and saying, right, this is where cloud can really come into its own and helping with certain things, such as accelerating the need for actually helping our patients, our customers, the citizens themselves, and actually delivering services and helping them out. And to be quite honest, behind the scenes also, and hopefully some colleagues also on this call would have seen, is that there was a lot more talk, a lot more people actually communicating a lot more efficiently in the NHS, and saying that we need to actually start talking to each other in terms of sharing information, sharing data, how services connect to each other, etc., etc. Hands up, most of this was done in a greenfield perspective, which was perfect for cloud. And again, taking a small step back, I did work for the NHS BSA at the time, like you mentioned. I've changed organisations a lot during the last 3 years, to be quite honest. From where I was, being that ALB perspective, providing citizen services, to actually start talking to lights of the NHS Digital, NHS England, and also the wider hospitals and trusts, of bringing this together really, really helped everybody to understand the power of cloud. So from that perspective, it basically helped in many ways. And one of the main ways was actually jumping straight from a perspective of where can I actually use my tin and connect efficiently, to actually saying, right, I haven't got that capacity there on my premise, on my tin, to actually deliver these services which we need right now. And basically jumping straight into the cloud, straight into services, whether they have been IaaS services, PaaS services, or straight into cloud native FaaS services, was a great accelerator there. So for us, the pandemic really kicked everything off. And during that time, so we delivered, I think, a total of, there was over 300 different services in different cloud providers, not just AWS, but using many different suppliers, many different. But what was key out this, they all talked to each other, they were all connected, and they all served one purpose, which was serving that patient's experience. And out of the back of that, one of the main things, and basically allowed me to jump over to the NHS side of things, was to carry on this momentum, carry on this power of using cloud technologies, using connectivity to start actually accelerating this forward. And it's not just myself, there's many colleagues within the NHS space now going to the Transformation Directorate who looked at this further. And out of this, we came with basically a number of policies there. So the What Good Look Like framework was initiated, who pays for what, and one was close to my heart is the nationwide NHS cloud strategy. So that's where we are. And I say out of this, we're trying to basically bring things together, understand how actually we can actually purchase these services moving forward, which is the main blockers, the resourcing aspect behind it, because we do know that we very, very lacking on resources. Again, nurses, doctors, yes, but also behind the scenes, the administration staff, the technical staff who are actually running these services as well. And out of the back of that is absolutely training. So actually bringing our own people on to understand that this is a change, this is a culture change, not just technical, and actually how that will affect them in a positive manner in their ways of working going forward. Hopefully that sums it up quickly. And I'm sorry, I'm sure I focus on a couple of key areas, messages there, hopefully.
No, I think it does. And I think, the key for me there is that, change, the desire for change is like a supply and demand economics, isn't it? The demand is huge, the supply is difficult. And we're not just necessarily talking about skills, is that being able to affect change in any large organization, and of course, public sector is the largest organization in the land, whether, central government, health, whatever. It's difficult to do. And I think, like you said, with COVID, one of the things that we've seen across the board is that when everyone is forced to make a change at the same time, that's sometimes one of the best experiences in many ways that I've certainly seen, and certainly is what I've captured there. I think it's probably a good chance to move into the kind of the meat of the discussion. And I think, Abby, I'll come to you first. I'm not always a big fan of using the word problem, but then it sounds a bit cliche to say we don't have problems, we only have opportunities or something like that. But it is, or there have been problems or difficulties or issues or concerns in order to move to a more cloud-based future. What are the sorts of things that you've been seeing that have sort of been the largest part of the makeup of that, and how have you found ways to resolve that?
I think Chris has touched on it there a little bit. There is a shortage of staff, maybe a shortage of skills as well. And then there's the challenge of when you do scale up your staff so they can manage this kind of technology, they often leave. So retention is one of those challenges, I would say. It's where the channel can come into play, whether it's training, whether it's the services, whether it's the design side of things. But really, you want those skills in-house to be able to manage those environments over a long period of time. And then you said about opportunities with problems. You want the people who know the organizations and the systems very well so they can identify those opportunities. So not just where can we use cloud, what can we put up in the cloud, but where should we and what are the benefits? And going back to everything going on with the ICSs, it's integrated care. Is that what we're achieving with this? And you want the people on the ground who understand that to have those skills. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, sure. And I think really it's probably a good time to bring in Tom as well, and not even try and change that question, is ask the same question. What are you seeing from an AWS perspective, and from your experience? What are the problems? How have you addressed them? What's most common? What are the niche problems as well that maybe catch people out?
I'd agree with everything Abby said. I think there's a build on that as well, just around the I guess the resource, the bandwidth. I mean, we've talked quite extensively around the I suppose the impact on workforce of COVID, the fact that people have been working at an increased rate. At the same time, we're trying to implement integrated care systems, change the way in which health systems are working. So actually, to expect there to be then on top of the business as usual to then go and reskill and develop those skills in a new way of working is a big ask. So I'd certainly say that point. I'd certainly say on the skills. So that leads to the point around there being the skills gap. And that's not an NHS challenge, not isolated to NHS. That we see that across all sectors, that there is a skill shortage when it comes to cloud computing. And I guess kind of with that, and I don't want to sound I guess negative, but sometimes it's sort of the appreciation of what cloud is. So quite often it's viewed as somebody else's data center, and actually it's a lot more than that. And I think Chris had a front row seat in some of the I guess the proof points of how quickly you can innovate on cloud, how quickly you can experiment and then deploy at scale, and really that gives people that kind of real opportunity to I guess to innovate without the fear of necessary the consequences of a failed experiment. So I think that's sometimes something that gets missed. So yeah, I suppose really build on the points that Abby made.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I know ignorance always sounds like a really bad word. It's not intended as it in this case. I think sometimes what people forget is that cloud and its sort of biggest consumer opportunity isn't really that old. And like you say, I think it is a little ignorant to refer to it as someone else's data center, because it is so much more than that. You know, I've been putting stuff in other people's data centers for years. It wasn't called cloud when I did it. It was someone else's data center. And it's about, yeah, you've got those people who were sort of early adopters with skills and who've been able to kind of, you know, touch and prod and learn. And I think it is it's a real lovely environment to be able to do that as well. You know, from our perspective at Cloud Gateway, we were able to do what we did, to build something on a credit card, which if we'd have done it in hardware years ago, we just simply couldn't. We would have needed £500,000 to get started. So there's so much more opportunity, I think, for that kind of thing, for that sort of that immersion, that testing, that play environment, knowing that you can achieve so much. So I guess, you know, coming back to the sort of, it's not even an elephant in the room anymore, is it? It's the back to COVID-19. Is Chris, coming back to yourself, how much has demand accelerated because of COVID-19, or as a byproduct of what's happened for COVID-19? And I don't mean necessarily demand directly for cloud. I mean demand for change from what was there before to this kind of new world.
Yeah, real question again. It's demand's basically based off what's people actually seeing down the art of the possible with cloud, in terms of, you know, this data sharing, which never happened before. This understanding that you can actually get these, you know, the immunity details shared across, and not just between now the clinicians, but also the patients as they're using the NHS app there with your COVID certification, for example. It's actually showing that this is the art of the possible now, where things can actually be more integrated, more connected, but also that this is not just a technical exercise anymore, but also impacts the clinicians, the transform the organization development kind of side of things. And again, it's broadening up where this culture is and now needs to actually go to. Again, with COVID also, it's understanding that, you know, it is now safe enough to actually put your stuff into the cloud, which was always a myth back then. So it's like, I've got my data's in that physical location there on that little bit of hard disk, which is blinking away, which no longer is the case anymore. I want to move away from that. And now I've got this infinite amount of detail, infinite amount of information at my hands, but also my clinicians' hands, that they can make a lot more basic understanding of the data of that patient to drive better outcomes there. And that's what we want to get to. It's understanding how all these systems can actually get to each other. And it's a COVID pandemic, it was a terrible incident, but at the same time, there's a lot of good things that come out of it. And it's driving a lot of things forward now. Again, we've got organizations, and the formations of ICSs is the perfect opportunity to start looking at these use of these services at the right scale. So what we saw before the pandemic, as an example, is that there was these little pockets of excellence forming, whether that be a GP trust, in a pharmacy, in a local hospital, but they were small, they were shadow IT activities. With the form of IT ICSs now, we can actually get them at the right scale to say, right, you can bring all these expertise into that kind of level, not the center, not the bottom, but in the middle, to actually start driving change within that area, then hopefully connect all together using national services.
One thing I would like to see is the urgency that the pandemic created. I want that urgency and the agility to be applied to the mental health crisis, health inequality. Imagine what could be achieved if we had that same kind of urgency behind it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. It's now it's literally, we've got that foundation there, the COVID pandemic. How can we provide outside the mental health crisis, social care, you know, the wider aspects? Yeah,
housing. You know, you're looking at all the other issues that are actually going to impact on a citizen's health, and enabling that integration. Like I say, what can you achieve now if you applied that same approach? Sorry, it's the opportunity rather than the problem again. We're going to sound really cheesy by the end of this, aren't we?
No, it's right. You know, what's fascinated me is that, you know, say, apart from the obvious with COVID-19, what it is a cultural phenomenon that none of us really would have predicted we'd ever get to see in our life. Is, you know, it's very natural for people to want to see someone else go first. That's the kind of, you know, the early adopter methodology. But when everyone's kind of pushed in the pool at the same time, then everyone swims, and that kind of has been a cultural change rather than anything else. And actually, I think the us who have seen it will be that continuing generation professionally that will do it again. I think it will be very difficult to hide behind that moving forwards, which is a really positive thing, because we've seen what good can come of it. So I think, Tom, taking that same to question and bringing that to you as well about that demand, you guys you are the cloud for all intents and purposes. So what have you seen in that time? What changes in approach, not just scale? I'm sure you've seen a lot more people consume cloud, but how they're doing it, what they're looking to do.
Well, I think first of all, I'd say there's probably some of the I guess what would have been previously would have been barriers to people using the cloud have kind of been addressed. So when you move to the cloud, yes, absolutely do your due diligence. Yes, you need to have all the right governance arrangements and security arrangements and all of those sorts of things in place. But actually, the thing that organisations in the health space in the UK can take confidence from is the fact that a lot of this has now been done a number of times. I suppose COVID, because people were forced to work in a certain way, we now look at it and say, actually, there's a lot of the things around things like storing patient identifiable data. That's been ticked both in terms of the likes of NHS England and NHS Digital with some of the services they run, but also in the likes of looking at systems like all of the Lorenzo EPR systems now sit in the cloud on AWS. Those concerns have been ticked off and addressed, so you can kind of get past those obstacles a lot more quickly. I think the other point is that through the work people like Chris are doing and also colleagues in NHS Digital is also now kind of really bringing that cloud first policy to the fore, and actually asking the questions of when as an organisation looking to invest in some sort of digital project, are you genuinely looking at cloud first? Because actually many instances for the reasons we talked about, and yes, absolutely, there's a cost argument to doing it in the cloud. You talked about building stuff on the back of a credit card rather than a £500,000 investment. Yes, there's that's there. The return investment story is there, but actually the innovation is the reason people stick with cloud and start doing more on cloud and start scaling on cloud because of that. Again, that flexibility to scale up and scale down as they're required.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Say we wouldn't have ever had that chance to do that. I think that opens up a question about different financial models, which I've heard come up several times, that sometimes are blockers, sometimes not. A few years ago, we gleefully walked into the wonderful new world of cloud, thinking that OPEX was absolutely the way to go, and that no CFO in the land wanted to spend money on CapEx, because this was a brave new world. And then we found that we had as many conversations where someone was asking about spending CapEx as they were OPEX, and it all became, sort of very confusing. In a way, I think I actually quite like the fact that it's still mixed. That's actually, gives us food for thought for actually there's not just one right way to do things. So, Abby, I know we were talking about this. What different cost model approaches have you seen? With probably the obvious too, but what maybe shapes those, or how can we all assist in bringing those to the forefront?
Yeah, I think predictability has been a huge challenge and a huge blocker, because of the way that NHS organisations are funded as well. I think Chris might have a comment on that shortly, but it's also up to your channel partners really to match your needs. So if it's a case of you've only got capital funding to use, then it needs to be a predictable cost for a predictable term. That is possible. That is possible, at least with some workloads, with some use cases. So it's about working with your channel partner, and then on an ongoing case, you need to make sure that those environments are optimized. So it's not enough to say this is what it's going to cost you for the next 3 years. It's that continuous reviewing of what the costs are and whether you should be paying those costs, whether there's anything you can do to optimize it and change it. And it's relying on your channel partners for that, or hiring someone full time to do it. And then we go back to the resource shortage again. So,
yeah, and I think, Chris, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that as well. Same question.
Yeah, no, we're interesting. So, yeah, from my perspective, I've been around the NHS people, the ICS of the trust last year, asking what the main blockers are, and funding that is the number one out there. It's the understanding I've got all this capital expenditure in my budget, but revenue based is the way that cloud gets funded, and I can't easily transfer that cost. And to be quite honest, we're looking at this from two methodologies: a short term and a long term. Short term wise, it's yes, you've got that capital there. It doesn't block you from actually moving to cloud. There is many different frameworks out there. There's G Cloud out there, which allow you to transfer that using likes of Softcat, for example, actually prepaying services using capital, which then can translate into revenue downstream to the cloud providers. But also this allows you to say, right, I can actually try before I buy. Because what we're also seeing is the people want to sort of do that big bang approach of understanding, right, I need to put all my capital into this to actually get any value out of it. It's not that case. You know, start with the small stuff. Start with something small service you've got, try it out, and just go on back of what Abby said earlier. It's getting a transfer migration across there into cloud. I'm going to be totally open and honest with everybody on this call. When you first do that, it is more expensive, but that's because you need to optimize going forward. And this is where people fall down, transferring to basic cloud straight away. Oh, it's more expensive. I'm going back to tin. I know what my data center costs are, and it's, you know, and again, just to be open and honest with people on the call, it's because most times your tin costs are actually hidden costs. So you don't pay for power, you don't pay for water costs for your cooling systems, you don't pay for rental costs for your data centers, for example. It's trying to basically highlight these are hidden costs. But going back to what I said before, it's literally as soon as you get onto the cloud, it doesn't stop there. It's actually taking on some of these cloud services which have been, let's say, useful for economies of scale. So using managed databases, so you're moving a lot of license costs there and getting to that progressive mode where you're actually going to cloud native, where you are charged by per transaction, which is really, really small. So a good example of this is, again, going back to the COVID pandemic, and we did a little cost exercise at the start, and apologies, I'm going to mention something now which is really, really horrible to people, but I was the guy who actually sent out all the text messages to people saying stay indoors. We did a cost exercise before this where if we did this on premise on tin, it would have cost literally about about 37 pence per transaction per text message. If we used an on-premise infrastructure using a provider, using cloud and using Demystifying, so we've got economies of scale, they're also using government services, we got that down to, I think it was 0.002 pence per transaction. So again, it's understanding that if you do actually take on these cloud native services, you've got a lot more savings there, and it also scalability as well going forward. Long term, we are working closely, and this is the NHS England Transformation Directorate, working closely with our financial teams in the NHS, with the Treasury and Crown Commercial Services to look at this issue around capital and revenue and how we can actually transform this going forward. Hands up, this is not going to be overnight thing. It's going to take time, but we're trying to work with short-term and long-term goals here.
Oh, well done for becoming the most disliked man on a webinar ever. That's some feat. I'm well impressed. I think again, cost with cloud and tin. You're absolutely right. We do exercises exactly the same. For the hidden costs with your hardware are, you know, little things like, okay, so something's broken, so someone's got to go and RMA it, someone's got to go and do something with it, there's a man in a van, there's a whatever there are, there's all these little costs that you don't think of. But I think one of the things that I see with cloud, and I'm going to attempt to be as disliked as Chris here, is that I actually don't think that many cloud teams that I have worked with are yet disciplined enough with how they manage what they do with a consideration for cost. Again, I'm sure there's an army of dev people who now want my head on the spike, but the amount of times I've seen things that just tick, and it will change. This is a new world. It still is, and it will be for a long time. You know, your financial people as well will start to change as well. They're used to predictability. They're used to a number that says doop doop doop. That's just not how it's going to work. But it can be more efficient. Often the costs where they are more expensive are because of a lack of discipline is really what it is. I should probably give the final word there to Tom, because I have no doubt people have come to you many times and said your service is far too expensive. I thought this was the panacea of cost saving.
No, I think Chris hit the nail on the head there. I think a little bit about it's around two things really around comparing apples with apples, so that all the other hidden costs you just don't see in tin. I think there's probably another point around, we within reason, but pretty large reason, you can use cloud and you can access pretty much infinite compute and storage resources pretty quickly. And actually, for a CFO, that can feel a little bit scary that actually someone's going to go off and mine Bitcoin or do something crazy, and they're going to get a massive bill at the end of the month. I think that's where there's a few things come in. You can put in restrictions, you can put in spending caps to give you that predictability. I think that the work that Softcat do that's really good is actually around that optimization of and providing some of that predictability, but also identifying in the optimization where you can essentially release some of that resource to do other things, which is a really, really valuable, I think, really valuable service to customers, to keep helping them extract more value out of that investment that they've made. I think the other point in the optimization, and Chris touched on it a bit, but actually that point of going really cloud native, so just rather than buying some compute or storage, actually moving into serverless, where you're paying for transaction, you're paying for an event at fractions of a penny at a time. And we've seen examples of customers' bills drop from, I don't know, there's an example of a service that's running in one NHS organisation was costing something like $500 a month. It's now about $100 a month for the equivalent, because they switched it to serverless. And that's a great example of actually, as you start to mature and evolve on that journey, then you can start to reap some of those real benefits. But it's difficult to see them up front at the start. I think, but actually, when you start on that journey, probably the other point I would make on the kind of the apples, comparing apples for apples, before you, certainly from a migration perspective, before starting on the migration, is also getting that real clarity of what you've got at the moment. Because quite often we go to various organisations, not just NHS, across all sectors, and it's amazing that they don't know what they've got, and they don't know what level of utilisation they have, and they don't know actually, when you start just almost as a lift and shift, if you put that in cloud, what does that look like? And I think that's kind of the starting point that sometimes people miss when they start on that journey.
Yeah, I noticed that Abby used the hand up facility, which is very polite. So
I have a very mundane comment. It's incredibly mundane, so I apologise. But the scarier thing than the potential cost to me is that lack of agility at times like these. So everyone knows we've got crazy supply chain issues at the moment. If cost comes into it, there's a benefit to agility, to that ability to respond to citizens' needs, clinicians' needs, the IT team's needs. And I think we should probably be focusing on that, the benefits that it can give us, how quickly we can respond to need, as well as factoring in the cost. And again, that's where your channel partners are there to help to sort of balance it out, maybe help you out with those business cases and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think as mundane as it is, those supply chain issues are one of the other factors that are forcing people's hands for the better.
yeah, I mean, I don't find that mundane at all, but then I'm a number nerd, so I actually think things like this are almost actuarial, the sort of things that underpin insurance policies. No one likes paying a car insurance until their car's upside down and it's been written off, and then they need to claim on it. It's that because there's no pounds and pence specifically against that ability to do those things. It isn't sometimes seen, and I think that is actually, say, like I said, with the changes in CFOs, changes in technical approaches, I think this is a new world. It might even become a completely new profession, that it is kind of, understanding exactly what those things are and putting them all together, because you don't want to measure the cost of failure at the point of failure. That's not good. So no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's not mundane for me, because I think sometimes it's overlooked. It probably should not be as overlooked as it possibly is. I don't think people are necessarily using that as a sole reason not to go to use cloud services, but I don't think it's appreciated maybe as much in the decision-making process. So yeah, don't knock yourself with mundane comments. There we go. And I think that probably takes us nicely to something that was mentioned earlier that I think is, this one is always a fun one in any public sector body. Central government, local government, policing is really entertaining, but is integration of services and cross-county and nationwide. I mean, I can tell you there are, including my mum, is absolutely shocked that her records and things aren't shared if she goes across the county border. She thinks that there's this sort of wonderful utopia that wherever she falls ill, she will be looked after. That we now have a platform that is more sort of apt for us to be able to do that as a nation. We, for me, have a cultural change, and again, that's what I think has come out of COVID. That looks, there's more people with a want and a will and a desire to do this. So, what's the reality of what we're seeing? What hurdles have we already jumped, and what have we still got in front of us? And I think probably, Chris, you're going to be the best one to come to first to set the scene. Don't say anything that's going to get you in trouble again.
No, it's just so yeah, really good question. And to be honest, I really sympathise with it. I live right on the border between two NHS foundations for some my records are in two different areas. And yes, it does become a bit of a nightmare when you're trying to do some with some medical treatment. So yeah, so literally again, to the back of the pandemic, it's understand that cloud is a nice platform there, and also one of the key areas, it all runs on APIs. I don't know a cloud provider which hasn't got an API function there. And it's actually showing, and again, we did this throughout the pandemic, actually before the pandemic, I'm actually sharing this data around there. So using shared care records, so on and so forth. But we had underlying issues, and main issues was that connectivity between these the trusts, the services going forward, and also the standardization. What standards do we use? How that's going to be affected. So what we found at the back of the pandemic, and this again, another perfect example of this one, is that the data, we stored all the data centrally on a cloud platform. That cloud platform actually spun over 4 different types of cloud platforms, but we actually had different types of connectivity processes running throughout, actually sharing data, accessing data. What also, just going really back to what Tom said earlier, security was always an issue around this. It was, as soon as that data left my platform, being a CEO or a CDO who's got responsibility there and accountability for it, and it's misused somehow, I'm responsible for it because I haven't got that traceability, that understanding that it's being used for the right purpose. What we found with cloud, and again, we use other vendors in this party as well, was that this enabled our data to be tracked and monitored throughout the process. And again, it gives that confidence there that this connectivity can actually work and be successfully managed and secure at the same time going forward. Again, hands up, we're not perfect, we're not there yet, and there's a lot of work going into this. Main work of understanding, where that data held, is it held at a local level, a national level, what level of detail do we need, etc., and that's still going in the background, to be quite honest. And it's all coming off the back of the pandemic of how we actually start interacting with each other, and that's another one of the main features where we bring the ICSs into the side of things, understanding, what's that level of detail we need that data and how that data is shared at that level, rather than trying to do bits and pieces at lower levels, for example, or trying to tackle the big problem in the centre.
And do you feel that you've seen a big cultural shift in the last couple of years, or do you think there was something happening already, and this has just kind of tilted the curve upwards a bit?
Yeah. So it was happening already, to be quite honest. So we know that shared care records have been out there, and they were starting off just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic actually rapidly enabled this to happen, and it's actually trying to carry on with that momentum going forward. To understand what's that going to be like. Again, we've got the National Central Record Laws Caterer as well, a service which actually pulls into different areas, so on and so forth. And again, that's taken a really big boost during the pandemic for understanding where people are, and just take a really big sidestep as well. It's not just about the patient data, but it's also about our workforce. So during the pandemic, when we got a lot of workforce back in from retirement to help out, but also bank staff was basically being shipped around the country. And with this one, it's understanding who could do what as well. So there's new services spun up. Digital staff passports is a great one we did during the pandemic. Not personally, it was another team, but they did a really, really good job on this. I'm actually understanding, sharing that data around, lower efficiency, again, using APIs, using understanding of actually getting people on board a lot more quickly to help patients during this time. So again, it comes on many different levels.
Yeah, for sure. And Abby, I mean, I'd have thought that you would probably have a lot to say on this from what you've seen, because obviously you're working with different organisations, different counties, different geographies, and you probably see some that are working slightly more siloed, some that aren't. So you're kind of working across. What have you seen, and what, again, that same sort of question, what hurdles do you think that we've now overcome, and what do you still see as those that are in front of us, and how are you dealing with those?
Yeah, I've seen loads of progress in the last 6 months. ICS leads picking certain departments, certain use cases, certain illnesses, and really streamlining those processes and that flow of care. I always come from it almost from a patient's perspective, because I have a family full of demics, so that's what I know. And from my perspective, I think that the greatest benefit is going to be for people with chronic illnesses, with those comorbidities. So it doesn't matter whether you get diagnosed at location A and you have a scan at location B, and at location C is where you get treated. As a patient, you don't care. You don't really want to know. Tell me where to go for my treatment, and also I want to see it. I want to see a timeline of my care. That's where the benefit is. You know, people with chronic illnesses and comorbidities, huge opportunity for them. Mental health, you know, if the care isn't joined up when it comes to mental health, and if you're being treated for cancer, obviously this is the mental health is going to come into it at some point. You want it to feel like it's all in one place. You don't want that added burden. You want to be empowered as a patient, but you don't want the burden of having to manage your own care either. So to make that as simple as possible, that's the end goal for me as a patient, and to see my family and friends almost not realize the work that goes on in the background to make it so streamlined.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the perfect place for all of the likes of us to be. It's almost that no one knows how it's happened. That's great for all of us to have achieved that. I'd be very pleased going home like that, and I'd get my mum off my back as well, which would be useful. So Tom, from your perspective then, and I think this kind of ties nicely with the collaboration as well, you know, one of the things that I've seen that is, you know, again, last couple of years, but it was already happening, is that, you know, the amazing collaboration between, you know, typically different companies that would be seen as competitors, people who would be seen as sort of, you know, maybe touching on the Venn diagram, working together with different ICSs or the equivalent of just CCGs or different trusts or this, that, and the other. Again, what have you seen that has been you know, those big steps forward that you guys have taken? Because I've really seen AWS, you know, right at the forefront of all of this. So, you know, you must have had that sort of nationwide exposure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think probably just so Abby was talking on about it a bit, and Chris as well. But that piece, as ICS has become legal entities, some of the barriers that are there from a governance perspective around how you can share data between those. Because at the moment within an ICS, they're all different organisations. They can't share that data. If they become one organisation, some of that goes away. And I think what that opens up is the opportunity for the NHS to make use of the data that it has. From a healthcare perspective, the NHS probably has some of the best healthcare data in the world, because you have things like a single patient identifier in the NHS number. People tend to stay with their primary care provider for cradles and graves. You get this really rich data set of longitudinal view of what it was happened to a patient over their lives, and then being able to aggregate that at a population level. And we saw some of the benefits of that in COVID. Was it was Lancashire and South Cumbria actually, which one of the sort of front running ICSs, and they were then able, with this, they'd already built this joint data set. They'd gone through some of the pain of the governance of creating this connected data sets across different care settings, but then they were very quickly able to flow in additional data sets that were linked to COVID, so they can then start to identify, you know, which of the sort of, I suppose, the combination of comorbidities that means that somebody is at risk and means that somebody is vulnerable, and actually been able to then target resources at those. I think that's a really exciting point, when kind of the stuff that we talk about that is in the cloud and sort of this sort of fairly sort of nebulous concept that actually turns into something real, where you've got a health system directing resources at the point where it's most relevant. I think that's really exciting. And then from there, because you're in the cloud, because we talked about the stuff like innovation before, you suddenly have access to all of these really powerful AI and machine learning tools that you pay for on a per minute basis or a per hour basis or whatever you decide, rather than investing millions of pounds worth of high performance compute power that you stick in a room somewhere. So that then you start to walk into a world where you can move into developing your own predictive models around that, so to look at what the system needs to do to move towards that more predictive care or proactive care approach.
Yeah, and I think that probably brings us nicely to immersion and innovation. So for the benefit of everybody else watching, I've been given strict orders to avoid the term proof of concept, because to be honest, it is old and stinky and doesn't really matter anymore, because we know the concept, particularly when we're talking about comms or hosting or infrastructure. If I wanted to prove spinning up something in AWS, I can do that in about 30 seconds. That's the end of that concept. Thanks very much. It's about seeing obviously what we can do, what we can show, what we can demonstrate. I know, from our perspective, we just decided to rip up the rule book on network and comms, and look at what we call a SASE platform. But ultimately, for us, and words that I love to use, we're building a digital foundation. To me, it's about getting a cloud-like experience from the comms, the security, the connectivity, and all of those bits are there to be able to take what you need exactly when you need them. And working with you guys at Softcat, you guys at AWS, that then gives us the ability to work with you to get you guys to demonstrate all of the fun aesthetic stuff. Let's be far more honest, the sort of stuff that you can sort of touch and poke a bit more. Tell us a little bit about those sort of immersion workshops, those innovation workshops. I'll probably go to Abby first. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing, how you get involved, and how the guys watching can get involved as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most impactful projects I've ever worked on are the ones that are born out of, I am very sorry, I'm getting a call and it's interrupting me. There we go. They've been born out of workshops with citizens, workshops with clinicians, and it's that problem opportunity thing again. So what is bugging you the most? What is taking up most of your time? And we start from those sort of questions, and we apply the technology solution so much further down the line. We have a team of technologists, chief technologists, and we have 2 healthcare technologists. So we work closely with those guys and our customers and the users that are impacted. And when I say users, I'm talking about service users. So I am talking about the doctors, I'm also talking about the patients as well. So we can help with those kind of workshops, and we can help with solutionizing the problems that they're facing and making their experience and their productivity as best it can be. And that's where we would start, really. Start with the problem, start with the users, and go from there. And then we work with partners like AWS as well. So when we get to that stage, when we've identified a problem or an opportunity, we work with the likes of AWS. Tom, would you like to explain a little bit about the resource you have available?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do something similar. We call it the working backwards process, but it's essentially, as you described there, is what's the thing. If you were to jump to the end point where you're telling the world of the great success you've had, and then work back from that to where you are now, and that's kind of an interesting process to start to sort of put the steps in there. I think the other thing I'd say is that if people are new to working in the cloud, we do this quite a lot actually. It's, and there's an offer there to folks that are listening in, is that we call them immersion days, but pick a topic that's particularly important if you want to start looking at cloud. So it could be something like governance in the cloud, or it could be security, or it could be something a bit more advanced around AI and machine learning perhaps. But we bring in some of our subject matter experts to really spend time getting hands on keyboards, showing how that's done. So kind of as to the term of the webinar of demystifying, but actually this is how you do it. So people actually get that real life experience of doing that, and then start to move to that being more self-sufficient space.
I think for the digital teams as well, there's also the possibility of readiness assessments, rapid adoption, services packaging. There's lots available in the industry for digital teams within the NHS. So it's a case of working with your partners really, and identifying what support you need. And most partners will be able to do that on almost like a pick and mix basis, and then fill in those gaps in knowledge and skills as they go along with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good observation. For me, it's kind of the opposite to how things used to be sold. Is if someone's coming to you and selling something, then they have no idea really what your problems are, what your requirements are. It should be the other way around. You should almost be taken by surprise. You should come and give me those things, and we'll work them out together and build from that. So I think that's, again, it's a very new way of doing things, but it's so effective and so much so much of a better way of doing things as well. And like you say, people are then engaged. Everyone's engaged. Everyone wants to be there. Chris, I mean, do you want to give us a couple of minutes on, obviously you've been on the, I'm going to say, the right end of these wonderful experiences. So, what's your experience, and what would you sort of, say to those guys who are listening? What's the best benefits they could get out of that sort of thing?
So for me, the cloud is it's that enabler of a two-way doors perspective. So you can try things, but actually making that really big investment up front. So there is free tier access out there. You can get in, cost you nothing. At the same time, if you want to basically dive down, it's not going to cost you much to actually start trying these things out. But for me, the big benefit in this comes down to the boring, mundane thing of business cases. So it's great now you've done a business case up, but you're trying to sell that business case, but on a piece of paper, you're trying to sell a dream. But if you can actually show something to somebody and say, right, this is actually what's worthwhile, that's a great thing. And we've got a great example from my time, and I'm going back 4 years now. So when I went to the BSA, we worked in a contact centre. It was one of the largest contact centre in the NHS, which was literally going through people ringing up, asking questions. What we found out from our AWS representative at the time is that there was a new service, Amazon Connect, out there. And again, we just pre-service, we jumped on, we tried it. And off the back of that, we actually spawned basically a AI-led contact center, and actually start getting people actually on the concept actually involved. So again, bringing a business case more life, actually showing what benefits, not just in cost, but also bringing people on the journey, skills, training, so on and so forth. And that adds more feeling to it and gets the backing of your financial teams, of your board, of your commercial teams going forward. And that's what I like about cloud. It's like a little spark you can try out first and actually start building on top of that, rather than trying to predict the future for a business case in effect.
Cool. Thanks for that. Well, that gives us a whole 5 minutes to wrap ourselves into a very quick Q&A. And I think we may only get through one quick question here. We can definitely answer more outside of this. And there are a few questions that come in, so we should be able to respond to them. That won't be a problem. But a couple that have come up that I'm going to try and bring together and see if everyone's got a quick answer on this is, how can I allay fears or concerns around patient identifiable data being in cloud, and or any GDPR issues I feel I may have? That's a bit of a mouthful. I've tried to kind of bring that all to one kind of question, and you've all got about 60 seconds each to go for it. So Tom, I'm gonna go to you first. Go for it.
So probably a couple of things. So there's already patient identifiable data stored in the cloud, in AWS, in lots of different places. That's something that's sort of a set of hoops that have been jumped through. The services are GDPR compliant, and then I guess the other piece that comes about is also you can encrypt it with your own tools. You can encrypt it with your however you want, in a way that anybody else, if they even got access to it, wouldn't be able to decrypt that and see that data. So even the National Cybersecurity Centre says that the cloud is more secure than on-premise. So it's a do your due diligence, but there's quick answers to those questions with proof points.
Cool. And I'm sure Abby's not going to appreciate me leaning on her for a technical answer, but I'm sure you've had these concerns raised by the guys that you work with. What sort of answers do you have for them? What would your advice be?
I mean, part of it's the services that your channel partners can offer. So penetration testing, and running any of your cloud strategy past a cybersecurity strategist as well. Bringing all that resource together to give you that confidence in whatever it is that you're about to embark on. Humans are not infallible, and that's probably the bit that you want to check more than anything else. So I'd just say lean on your partners, really. The services are there, their expertise are there. Your channel partners aren't doing this for the first time, and they do it for banking. They do it for super critical environments. Lean on your partners that have done it day in, day out for the past 10 years.
Lovely. And Chris, you've been there, done that, got many T-shirts. What's your final words of wisdom?
No, so just basically ditto what Tom and Abby said. So literally, we've got the understanding that AWS and other cloud providers have got that qualifications there, so that they are secure. The main factor in this is human in the loop. So there is issues there, but don't try and mark your own work, get somebody else in. again, use that for penetration testers. There's guidance there from National Cybersecurity Centre as well. And also on the NHS Digital NHS England website, there's plenty of guidance of how to do it. But yes, it's just to be very clear, it is safe to put patient data in the cloud. We're fully behind it. Any concerns, come and speak to us. We've got the right people in the room to help.
Excellent stuff. Well, that just about almost perfectly takes us to time. So I think it's probably best for me to wrap up, say thank you to all of those have come along to watch and to listen. We all really appreciate that. Any questions we didn't get to answer, we'll look to answer outside of this. We'll make sure that the audio and video and all of those bits and pieces are distributed. I'd like to extend my own personal thanks to Abby, to Tom, and to Chris. Thanks, guys, for making this a great chat, great discussion. Really appreciate it. Chris, I can confirm it is still NHS England. They haven't changed since we've been on. So well done. So yeah, big thanks to everyone who took part and who's listened. And I hope that's been informative. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we'd really like to talk to you and to help with any of those problems, get in the immersion and innovation workshops and take it forward. So thanks once again, and I'll see you later.